Hi, I'm Niall Stanage from The Hill, and I'm glad you're joining us for a special event, a conversation with Dr. Phil McGraw. Better known to almost everyone simply as Dr. Phil, his hit TV show is now in its 20th season. He's the author of 9 New York Times bestsellers, and he has helped millions of Americans in every aspect of their lives. Before all that TV fame, Dr. Phil was a practicing psychologist. He holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the University of North Texas. Back in 2006, Dr. Phil received the prestigious Presidential Citation from the American Psychological Association. The association noted that his work had, they said, touched more Americans than any other living psychologist. He joins us today to talk about a sad and difficult subject, the recent spate of mass shootings, including the horrendous killing of 19 children and 2 adults in Uvalde, Texas. Dr. Phil, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
It seems to me that the most appropriate place to start is just in the emotional response to these events, particularly the mass shooting in Texas. Just tell me a little bit about how you first heard that news and how you experienced it.
Well, this, of course, hit very close to home for me now because I, of course, am from Texas, and I'm coming to you from Texas today in Dallas. And, you know, I have 2 grandchildren, one 10 and one 12. So you immediately personalize and go to what it would mean to you if this hit in your family with such innocent children. And you just ask yourself, you know, what's it going to take for us to wake up as a society and recognize that we have to do something to get these kind of things under control, because if we can't do what's necessary to keep our children safe, we're failing as a society. And unfortunately, this is not an isolated event in schools or mass shootings, either one. Since Uvalde happened, there have been at least 14 mass shootings with 9 dead and at least 61 injured just since that happened. So this is happening over and over and over again, and we don't seem to be reacting to it. Certainly not in a way that is bringing about any effect.
Right.
This is on the upswing.
Right.
It's more happened in 2021 than happened in 2018 or 2019. We're trending in the wrong direction. So my reaction as a mental health professional is frustration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, certainly these are horrific trends, and to have the trend moving in the wrong direction, I think, is something that appalls us all. But you point out your frustration and the fact that we seem to be having conversations after all of these tragedies, and yet they keep going on. But I believe you think that we're missing some things in these conversations, and I want to get into that in some detail, but could you just give us sort of off the top what kind of point by point you think is missing from the national conversation on this issue?
Well, this is a very large conversation, of course. You can't boil this down to the facts of what happened on a given situation or a given shooting, because each one is different. Each one has its own perpetrator and its own set of circumstances of what took place. This is a much larger conversation, and people tend to enter based on what's important to them. And if you enter from a different point of view, I think people psychologically tend to react to someone else's point of view as though that's the opposition. And that's not true. I think we have to start by saying, what can we all agree on? And there's a lot that we can all agree on here. We can agree that nobody, I don't care if you are a gun advocate, a Second Amendment advocate, or someone that is completely on the other side of that issue, I think everybody could agree that we don't want these things to happen. It's just a matter of what is the best route to go about stopping these. And we have to have realistic expectations. Look, there are an estimated 20 million assault rifles, for example, on the streets of America today. There are like 390 plus guns on the streets of America today. So passing legislation that stops the sale of these assault rifles right now, while that might be a great thing to do, there's probably 100+ year supply of these guns on the street right now. So what are we going to do to start managing the risk of those guns being in the hands of the wrong people
And
out
what
there?
do you, sorry.
You can't make that go away. They're already there.
Sure, and sorry to cut across you, but what do you think we should do given that sheer volume of guns that are in this nation?
Well, I think we have to set goals that can be met, and I think it's a game of inches. I think you have to set goals that can be met, and as I say, you have to have reasonable expectations about these things. Because the guns are out there, we have to start saying, how can we do something to manage identifying those people that are likely to misuse any kind of weapon whatsoever? And I'm sorry to say that we don't have the ability to give a psychological test or predict through some profile who's likely to pick up a gun like this and go shoot. We don't have an ironclad profile. However, we have identified a lot of traits and characteristics of those who do this, and with proper education and coming up with programs where you can educate local police, not just federals, but local police, educators, and to some extent, student bodies in schools to become eyes and ears to bring these people to the attention of someone that can help. I think you can begin to make a difference. And listen, this is going to sound like an unusual thing to say, but these people are often categorized as monsters. And I'm not making an excuse for them. What they do is monstrous, absolutely, unequivocally, inexcusably monstrous. But these are people that are mentally ill. They're suffering greatly in pain. And if you write them off just as monsters, you'll miss a lot of these people who are at risk for doing this. For example, in Buffalo, that shooter went to a teacher before graduation and said, when I graduate, I'm going to commit murder and suicide. I'm going to shoot a bunch of people and commit suicide. Now, the teacher saw this individual as a student, not as a monster, so there was a disconnect there. If she had looked at this and said, these are the kinds of people that do this, a student that's in pain, a student that's suicidal, a student that is marginalized, is the kind of person that can do this, that teacher might have taken this more seriously and responded to it more proactively. Mm-hmm. We need to recognize who actually does this kind of thing. And those traits and characteristics have been identified, and I can share some of those with you if you'd like.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a fascinating topic because on the one hand, obviously we want to intervene if we possibly can. And on the other, there's clearly sometimes a risk of it casting so wide a net that, every disturbed or emotionally distressed teen isn't going to shoot up a school, obviously, So what kind of traits are the ones that you think, drawing on your own training and expertise, what are the kind of traits we should actually be looking for, be having an awareness of in relation to this?
Well, and you brought up the reason I say we don't have a profile, because while the traits and characteristics I'm going to share with you are common to those that shoot, many people who have those traits and characteristics don't shoot. So it's something that you see among those who do, but not everyone that does. will act out in that way. But what we've seen, and this comes from a lot of different research sources, including the Secret Service, Homeland Security, the FBI, a lot of independent researchers. A lot of these shooters are current or former students, and in some studies, 90% of them targeted schools that they had attended. And what we have found out is that hardening the school doesn't necessarily work because it's oftentimes their own school, so they know the ins and outs. They know the back way in, they know the laundry chutes, they know different places. And we also know that most of these shootings happen before school or in the morning. Most of them happen in September, October, or January, so it's when they're returning back to school after a break. Most of these shooters have some type of mental, emotional, or social crisis that precedes this happening. So it doesn't come out of the blue. Now, again, a lot of people have that sort of event and it doesn't cause them to shoot, but the shooters, they've been through, our number one need is acceptance, our number one fear is rejection, and a lot of these shooters have been rejected. They've gone through some kind of bullying, or they've been cast aside and shunned by their school. They've been through a romantic breakup. They've been bullied. They're typically loners, with the exception of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold in Columbine, which worked as a pair. They're usually loners, and they do this by themselves. And they have grievances, real or imagined, against classmates, staff members at the school. They, real or imagined, they feel that someone has aggrieved them, but that's not always who they go and aggress against. Oftentimes it's surrogates. It's just someone that's safe and handy to them, somebody they have access to, that it's not necessarily those who aggrieved against them. And I mentioned these mental health problems that they have, and these can be psychological, behavioral, or neurological, but they are observable. So this myth about, it was the nicest young man just out of the blue, that's not true. These are observable things where those that they are in school with, for example, will say, he was acting very strangely. He was doing things that brought attention to the school. Maybe he was in conflict with school authorities or with the police. And invariably, they have a negative home life situation. And this can involve childhood trauma that can include violence, sexual assault, a parent that has committed suicide or is in prison. If you look at their home life situation, and I'm going to tell you why, even though not everyone that has these situations shoot, I'm going to tell you why this can be important to know in just a minute. And it really kind of devolves to kind of a hopelessness and a despair and a self-loathing. There's often previous suicide attempts. And we really miss something when we don't realize that these shootings are often suicidal. These are violent suicides. This is their way of killing themselves, so they intend to die when they go do this, and if somebody's willing to give their life to accomplish this, it's very hard to stop it. And
go ahead. Well, I was just going to say there's a lot of really important points you raised there, but one word that you used is sticking in my mind, which is the idea that these traits are often observable, as you put it. So, there's a lot of conversation right now, as you're well aware, about legislation, one thing or another, but also the provision of mental health care, which is obviously important. But it sounds to me like part of the reason you're speaking out on this issue is that you think we as citizens, as the public, need to be more aware of the things that we can observe, the red flags, so to speak, that might point out some risk of something like this happening. Is that fair?
It is very fair, and particularly because most of these people tell somebody what they're going to do and when they're going to do it beforehand.
Right.
It's called leakage. It happened with the Oxford shooting. It happened in Oakland, up in Detroit. As I mentioned, in Buffalo, he told a teacher. But oftentimes, as much as 2/3 of these people tell one or more people what they're going to do before they do it. But what does that person do? They don't know what to do. Do they take it seriously? Do they want to say something and create a problem with this individual? And people are afraid that telling is tattling. Schools, they don't want to think, well, I went and ratted somebody out, and that's the wrong thing to do. And that's just not the case here. But there is leakage. These people tell people what they're going to do. And why are they doing that, particularly with young people? They're doing that because they're wanting somebody to stop them. They're wanting somebody to intervene. They're wanting somebody to get involved here. And
let me stop you there, because that seems a really fascinating point. So you're saying that the reason there is what you term leakage, the reason that people indicate they might be doing something, is because they want someone to prevent them from doing it, in your view?
Well, it's like when you see someone that's committing suicide, they take some pills and then they call their estranged spouse and say, I hope you're happy. I've just taken a bunch of pills to kill myself. Well, if they really wanted to die, would they alert someone to what they've done? Or is it a cry for help? Are they wanting to get someone's attention? I think these people do it for a lot of different reasons. But if you tell somebody what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, we have to at least entertain that at some level, they're hoping somebody will stop them. Now, maybe that's not their conscious motivation. And, people do these sort of things, particularly young people, for multiple motivations. They do it because of depression. They do it because of suicide. They do it because of neurological problems they're having. There are all kinds of explanations. And I think it's important that we have a threat assessment model. And this has been created and distributed to over 40,000 schools. But how much of a priority is it with these schools? And the threat assessment model is designed to teach people what to look for. And if you see someone behaving in this way, and so you say, well, all right, we're going to not be punitive about this, but we're going to look in and see, is there something we can do to derail this student heading in a really bad direction? And then when you look into it, you do a home visit, you talk to parents, and you find out, wow, all of those things that I was just talking about, all the features that I was going through, a childhood trauma, a parent that's committed suicide or is in prison, domestic violence, all of these traumas, they're all there. Now you look and say, are there guns in the home? Are they locked up? Are they available? All of a sudden now, these things that don't predict that every time they're there, somebody's going to shoot, so they're not a profile you can predict, but you say, this is an at-risk situation. So now you can actually do something to maybe prevent something happening.
Sure.
And in addition to having the particular threat assessment model, then you now need to have a crisis response system. So if somebody does report this, what's going to happen?
Right.
What are you going to do? A student needs to know I can anonymously report this, and I know that I'm not going to get it in trouble. I'm not going to get involved. And this student is going to get some help. They're not going to get in trouble. They're going to get some help.
Sure.
And some states have that. Colorado, for example, has Safe to Tell. It's a crisis response system. And in 1 year, the school year 18-19, they had 20,000 tips that came in of somebody saying, hey, I'm really uncomfortable around this person.
Sure.
And we've got to have a mind shift where it's not this kind of George Orwellian big brother informing on our friends and neighbors, and get a mind shift to saying we're doing this to protect ourselves and this individual that's in pain. This isn't a punitive thing, it's a helpful thing.
Right. And I think the concept of a mind shift is obviously very important. And many of the things that you're talking about do require a cultural shift, a recalibration of our attitudes in these matters. But I do want to raise another point, which I don't think is playing devil's advocate. I just think it's asking a question that a lot of people would ask. People look at the United States and its unfortunately tragic record of these school shootings, and they don't see those things happening in other parts of the world, in other developed nations in particular. And the differential, no one's saying mental health care shouldn't be strengthened. No one's saying that people shouldn't be more aware of these danger signals. But a lot of people look at the disparity and think the difference is the guns. The difference is the availability of guns in the United States. To that you say what?
Well, there's no question about it. I think the statistics will bear out. We have more guns on the streets of America than any other country in the world. I think India is second with 70 million, and I'm not sure of that number, so fact check that. But we have an estimated 393 million guns on the streets of America, and that's from the National Shooting Sports Foundation number. And that's an estimate. Do we really know? But there are millions and millions and millions of guns, more guns than we have people. So clearly you can't shoot somebody if you don't have a gun. There's no question about that.
Can't we do something about that then? I know the Second Amendment's the Second Amendment, but shouldn't we be doing something about that?
I think there's no question that we have to address some of these things. For example, and if people are sensitive to the Second Amendment, I totally get that. But you can stop politicizing and pretending that this is about the Second Amendment. You can at least raise the limit to buying a weapon of war from 18 to 21. A young man's brain isn't even fully developed until at least 25 and maybe 35. They can't buy a pistol till they're 21, but they can buy a weapon of war at 18. That just doesn't even make common sense. Come on, this isn't about the Second Amendment. This is just common sense. That an 18-year-old boy can go buy a weapon of war at 18. Universal background checks. How does that in any way impair someone's Second Amendment rights? It just doesn't. Cool down periods, red flag laws. These things don't impinge on our Second Amendment rights. And I think that is a straw man to say that they do. My point is, you've already got almost 400 million guns on the street, 20 million AR-15 type rifles, and they're out there. So what are you going to do to manage the situation given that those guns are out there? And you can say, well, we'll go buy them all back. But you may buy some of them back, but those guns are out there. So what are we going to do to manage the risk associated with the wrong person having those guns in their hands? And that's something we can do right now.
Absolutely.
And if you start making these things one step at a time, then if eventually you're going to get the collective consciousness of America to the cumulative point where it's obvious that we need to do something different.
Sure. And I take that point, and I want to circle back to it as we finish this off in a few moments. But just when you talk about, the political element of it, the degree to which things are common sense, I understand the desire not to be partisan or to try to seek common ground. The interesting thing to me in this debate is that there actually is common ground among the general public for many of the things that you said, so-called red flag laws, background checks, assault weapons or assault-style weapons not being available to 18-year-olds. Given that those things are often supported by Republicans and Democrats, by which I mean Republican and Democratic voters, do you think the political system is failing us in failing to enact those kind of common sense measures?
I think it's failing us miserably. I think it's failing us miserably because I think, and if you talk to all the politicians, nobody wants this to happen. I mean, I don't care how far left or how far right or whatever. I don't believe there is a man or woman on Capitol Hill that would say, of course they would not say they want children to get shot, but that they would say they want at-risk individuals to have weapons of war in their hands. I think everybody would agree. The question is, how do we stop that from happening? You say, well, you can stop by not selling those guns. That's one thing, but that's not addressing the fact that you have millions of them already out there. And one of the things that we need to do is you've got to put money behind this. We've got to have a massive educational program about locking these guns up. Almost all of these shooters get these guns from family or friends. They get them from home. We have to have a massive educational program to require families to lock these guns up and keep them safe. So these kids that are upset, these kids that are having mental emotional problems and are in pain, can't go home and walk in a closet and pick up a gun and go to school and use it. You've got to put up barriers, in addition to all the other things. So I think, and this takes money. It takes money for education, for PSAs, for education in the schools, for all of these things. And that's why I say there's got to be a threat assessment model. There's got to be a reporting system. There's got to be an educational system. There's got to be a mind shift. There are things we can do to begin to, you're not going to eliminate this problem. That's unrealistic to say we're going to do something and not going to be any more school shootings. That's not reasonable. It's certainly admirable, but it's not realistic. We have to do what we can to minimize this occurrence.
And do you think the so-called gun lobby, by which I mean gun manufacturers as well as so-called gun rights groups, do they stand in the way of the kind of change that you would like to see?
Well, surely everyone is, enough is enough and too much is too much. At some point, people are going to say there has to be some common ground compromise here and recognize that the things that I'm talking about, and I think a lot of other people are talking about, I haven't invented these ideas about raising the age limit and cool down period and universal checks and red flag laws, which are in place in a lot of states. I didn't invent these things. They've been talked about many times. At some point, they're going to have to say, look, these are not Second Amendment infringements. We need to get behind these and start enforcing them so this trend that's going up starts going down. And I think when there's enough pressure on the politicians, then you're going to start seeing pushback on the lobbyists and you'll begin to see change.
Sure. Dr. Phil, I want to maybe try to at least end on a more hopeful note, because of course this is such a sad issue. We feel oftentimes that we're having the same conversation about it so frequently, and yet we see, yet another massacre, really. You are proposing, as I see it, a kind of cultural change in how we look at many of these issues. Do you think that that is beginning to happen? Do you see any, roots of hope beginning to take place? Do you see any positive changes edging up here, or do you just see it as a mostly rather bleak picture?
Well, right now, when you look at the numbers, you see this trend going up, and nobody is doing anything substantive about it. But I think that all of us in the mental health profession need to do a better job of educating people to the fact that this is a huge problem. And people know when something happens at a school like Uvalde with all of these innocent children, they recognize that's a huge problem. Children got shot. But we need to impact on people the magnitude. I asked several people when this happened, just in my walk of life, how many shootings do you think there were, either school shootings, mass shootings, whatever do you think there were last year? And the answers that I got were everywhere from 3 or 4 to 10 or 20. And I said, well, the FBI reported 61. That's more than 1 a week. And the Center for Homeland Defense and Security K-12 school shooting database, which defines a shooting as a firearm was brandished, either fired, disarmed, or misfired on campus, by that definition, there were 222 where a firearm showed up on a school campus. And people were stunned at the 61 and the 222. They were stunned. I don't think we're doing a good enough job with impacting on people just how widespread this is, because I think that we've become desensitized to it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And until you get something like Uvalde where you have so many innocent children, I think 4 or 5 getting shot doesn't really even make a headline anymore. It happens so often. I think we need to do a better job of educating people as to just how big of a problem this really is. And I think when we do that, people will stand up and really be heard.
Well, I think everyone would agree with that. It is a really interesting topic. I would love to talk with you about it more, but we're pretty much out of time here. I hope that this conversation has helped that impact. I hope people who watch will have a greater awareness of all of these issues, and I think you adding your voice to that debate is very important. So, Dr. Phil McGraw, thank you very much.
And thank you for asking such informed questions. And I just want to end by saying we do know a lot about who does these shootings, and with proper attention and education at the local level, I think we can identify these people and extend help to them before they do what they do. There are things we can do. And so you asked if I was hopeful about something. I'm hopeful that we have the information. If we can get it to the right people, we can start intervening, because most of these shootings start and are over within 2 minutes. And so we need to prevent, not just intervene. And we have the information where we can do that. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about this.